That was really interesting because a big part of your speech, you kind of painted a picture of why many in the UK actually voted to leave, a broken Europe. So actually Brexit is the silver lining. The silver lining is to fix broken Europe off the back of Brexit.
But with that difference that most of the people of the public opinion on the continent say, yeah, the stupidest thing to do is to leave it, or to destroy it. There is no reason to destroy the union. What we need to do is to reform it. And that is exactly what I think what will happen in the coming 2 years, because before 2019, that is besides the Brexit negotiation, you will have a reform part of the European Union in the direction of a more integrated internal market, a less bureaucratic, in my opinion, and more decisive European government. We don't need a European Commission of 28. We don't have even enough competences to give to 28 commissioners. What you need is a small European government of 12, 15 people, as was the initial idea. And you need to invest in things and in important challenges that were never on the radar screen of the Union. That's the defense union, the fight against terrorism, climate change, the migration crisis. That are new challenges, and there the Union have to show his added value.
But the word reform wasn't even being uttered by European leaders before Brexit. Now we're starting to hear, off the back of Brexit, we're starting to hear, oh yes, we need to reform.
I have to tell you, the first book that I wrote was about reform, and it was in 2005. I was Prime Minister at that moment. And the title was The United States of Europe. And I wrote that little book, and I came in the European Council, and all of my colleagues looked at me and he said, he's crazy. He has something that is not working well in his brain. Because that was not what you could say at that moment. Now, today, everybody is talking again about the United States of Europe, by the way, a word that was used first of all by Victor Hugo and then repeated by Winston Churchill. In his famous speech in Zurich, I think it was in 1948 or 49. Because don't make a misunderstanding, at that moment the conservatives were the pro-Europeans, it was Labour who were the anti-Europeans. But that has changed a little bit, I think, in the meanwhile. And Churchill was leader of the opposition at that moment. And he was of the opinion that Britain has to participate in the European Steel and Coke community, what Attlee didn't want to do. And he lost the vote in the Commons, I think with 6 or 7 votes difference only. There was a majority not to participate, and then this huge minority under the leadership of Winston Churchill to do it. And I'm telling you that because to recall history, the founding fathers of the European Union, including Churchill, even when he thought that maybe the Council of Europe was a better tool to develop, their idea was really to make a union that was integrated. What we have today is absolutely not the reformed Europe what the founding fathers had in mind. The founding fathers had already in mind a small European government, an integrated market, a serious budget. What is still lacking today when we are talking about the Union? So the reform idea was in the heart of the European project from day one, but has been forgotten by generations of politicians from whom it was more important to blame Europe when something goes wrong, instead to reform Europe when something is going the wrong direction.
So, certainly, yes, you need a louder voice from Europe, perhaps as a louder voice as, well, some of the stuff you haven't been shy and have been outspoken about Brexit. Some of the headlines just over here in the press, Verhofstadt brands Brexit is increasingly desperate as he orders the removal of Boris. Verhofstadt condemns the witch hunt by David Davis against British MEPs. Guy Verhofstadt pokes fun at Theresa May, which you've done, yes, over the Brexit speech in Florence. Improve the Brexit offer to EU citizens or will veto the deal. Guy Verhofstadt. Some of the papers here have branded you, as I'm sure you know, the Brexit botherer. It does bother you, doesn't it? It bothers you the UK's leaving.
No, so what I'm trying to do is to, for example, that on on Theresa May in Florence, I thought, yeah, this British humor. But apparently, I hope that didn't disappear. No, really.
That'll be the judge of the humor.
I hope that it doesn't disappear. That at least when Britain leaves the Union, that this legacy of British humor stays on board in the European Union. And what we are doing for the moment is simply to apply the treaty. The treaty says when a country is leaving, you need to organize this withdrawal, and you need also, in the same exercise, to have an idea, to have a consensus, what the new partnership will be. And that's exactly what we are doing. I know a lot of things are being put in the press on both sides, certainly, not only here in Britain, but what is the common interest of everybody, and certainly the common interest of citizens and the interest of industry, is that this withdrawal is done in an orderly way, and that such what we call new association agreement, that we work on that the fastest as possible, and in the meanwhile that you have a transition so that there is no disruption for whatever of the industries we have.
But pay our bar bill first, though.
It's not a bill. So I know that in the press they are saying it's a divorce bill or it is a punishment. It's nothing. It has nothing to do with that. There are a number of obligations that have been taken and will be taken from now on until 2019. And these obligations are producing payments in the years afterwards. That's normal. You take today a decision for an investment. This decision is taken in 2017, 18, for example, and it produces payments 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, depending on what type of investment it is. So the principle is the following: what you have decided with 28 will not be paid by 27. It will be paid by 28 because you have decided it with 28. I think everybody who is in the private sector and who is in an industry like yours can understand that. What you have decided together, you take the responsibility for that together. And you don't say, oh, it's a divorce. I go out and I let my wife with all the debts and all the difficulties. That's not happening.
Okay.
Will not happen.
Because we're against the clock, and I'm sure our friends will have some questions, let's talk about this industry. And we start with what I think many will say is one of the great success stories of Europe, and that's what's happened within the aviation industry. And of course, the UK was absolutely center of what's been achieved. But if no deal is signed, we know no deal, the UK signs no deal, or we don't agree a deal, then the UK falls back on the rules by the WTO. Big problem for the airline. They're not covered by the WTO. Covered. So what happens with aviation when the UK?
Well, there was a hearing about that in the European Parliament, and the one of the stars in this hearing was Mr. O'Reilly from Ryanair, and he described it, this nightmare, in his intervention. I have it here with me, the nightmare by. We are not talking about Ryanair when I'm talking about nightmare. I'm talking about it's also a joke, British humor, so, because otherwise tomorrow attack against it. I think it's important that there is a transition period, because that avoids a disruption. If there is no deal, and in March 2019 Britain goes out, and there is no WTO rules applying, there is nothing at all. So that's the nightmare.
How long a transition? What do you think?
We as Parliament have said 3 years, and Mrs. May has requested 2 years. In this period, 2-3 years, starting after 2019, that's what we are talking about.
Yep.
Transition period starts at the moment when you're. In our point of view, transition means that everything what exists continue to exist. So it's not a pick and choose saying, oh, we're going to do a transition because we like traveling for the travel industry, but not for this and not for that and not for that. No. When we talk about transition, and I think that in the brains of most British politicians, they have the same opinion, it concerns the whole acquis, we call it acquis, the existing situation of today. So the internal market, the customs union, all the participations, for example, in aviation, simply continues for 2 or 3 years. That's the idea for a transition. And also the freedom of movement makes part of that acquis. And then you have naturally a lot of more time to do what is necessary and to talk about the substance of your new agreement. Even when I think, when I'm looking through the files, when you talk about safety, there is a European Safety Agency, and also non-European members can participate. There is a European Common Aviation Area, and under certain conditions, non-European countries, as they do today, because today this area is in total now 36 countries for the moment. So it's possible.
Norway and Iceland are part of
Norway, Iceland. The only difference is naturally that if you enter in such a scenario, you are a member of this safety agency or this common travel area, but you are not deciding on how it works. That's the consequence. In Norway, they know it very well. In Iceland, they know it very well how it works. But there are solutions for that. The only thing what we are saying, we're going to only discuss this once we have also, first of all, solved the problem of the divorce. And then you have the transition, and then you have these... but the fact that you have a transition avoids that you have in any way disruption.
I don't think anybody believes, certainly the boss of IAG, Willie Walsh, the chief of London Heathrow Airport, John Holland Kay, don't believe anything will come to a standstill. But, I mean, because the EU...
They were very cautious, and I have...
Well, actually, Willie Walsh...
Their comments. Their comments in the European Parliament.
Willie Walsh doesn't think the prospect of no flying between the UK and Europe, he says, I don't agree with that at all. He said it would bring the whole of Europe to a standstill. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to agree. But what's good for us here is also good for you. I mean, like Lufthansa has, I believe, close to $1 billion tied up in Heathrow landing slots. They're not going to give that up.
You have not to tell that to me, to put the question to me. It's not we, the Europeans, who have started to talk about a hard Brexit, or have used the word better no deal than a bad deal. That is, in my opinion, the most dangerous thing, because you never know what can happen. I hope not. But in any way, such things are not helpful. What we need to do is to make the divorce working, the withdrawal agreement. Then, in the meanwhile, have an agreement, next step on the transition, what creates certainty for all the industries, and certainly for your industry. And then, you have then the negotiation about it.
But, some will say the talk of hard Brexit has arisen because of Europe has been very hard. Very hard. You want to teach... I know you said about Europe is more... We're seeing more EU fondness. But, you don't want others to leave. So, many will say you are making it very difficult for the UK. When the UK had the referendum, if 10 was the least wanting to leave the EU and 1 was the most wanting to leave, the UK was 7 on that scale. So there are 6 other countries, or there were, ahead of the UK that wanted out of the EU.
No, I think that's not the reality. I have here with me I have put it also on my social media. Do you think that European Union membership is an advantage for your country in 2017? That's the question that was put forward. And in all countries, besides Italy, Cyprus and Greece, and Cyprus and Greece very near to 50%. In all other member states, so that means 25, there was a huge majority to say, EU membership is in the advantage of my country in 2017. Even in Britain, in that figure, it was 55% at that moment, but it was a few months taken more or less a year after the referendum, not during.
Let's just talk about others before I come down here. Movement of people, obviously very important. This industry is very worried, obviously, about gaining staff, the access to to Europeans working. What is it? The British Hospitality Association estimates that around 15% of the sector is made up of migrants from the EU. I think the figure is like some 700,000. We've already seen something like 20% already return to their home countries. Where do you see that going in the negotiations? And will Brits be able to use the EU line? Like the Swiss?
EU line is very simple. The EU line is that we want to keep the freedom of movement of people, and that it makes an integrated part of the other freedom. Because everybody is talking about the single market. Well, the single market is not only a freedom of movement of goods, of services, and of capital, it's also of people. So for us, there is no question to start a discussion in which we say, oh, pick and choose. Oh, you like goods? Okay. Your services, even more? Yeah, okay. Capital, even more? And then no, and not on a free movement of people. That is not acceptable. On top of that, I think it's also not economically wise to do so, to limit freedom of movement of people. You have to know that the mobility, labor mobility in Europe is in fact already far too low. Labor mobility in Europe, ladies and gentlemen, is 1%. That means that on a yearly basis, there is 1% of the European population who at the end of the year work in another place than in the beginning of the year. You know what labor mobility in the US is? 10%. 10% of the people in the beginning of the year or at the end of the year are working in another place than in the beginning of the year. And everybody is complaining about labor mobility in Europe. Well, the labor mobility is too low in Europe. And the consequence of it is that we have more or less now between 2.5 and 3 million vacancies in Europe. That means open vacancies, professions, work that is not done, that is not fulfilled because of a lack of labor mobility. And that is, in my opinion, one of the reasons also for the constant lower economic growth we have in the whole of the European Union compared with, for example, the US. If you have a lack of labor mobility and you have vacancies that are not fulfilled, well, you have less economic growth. And that can cost you 0.5%, 0.6, 0.7, maybe 1% of economic growth on a yearly basis.
Where are these jobs? Because when you look at the periphery of Europe, we've always been talking about 20+% unemployment in, say, youth unemployment. Spain, Italy, Greece.
Yeah, the vacancies where I'm talking about is the overall figure for the European Union. And it's true, there is a huge unemployment figure, certainly in a number of southern European countries because of lack of labor reforms in that country. And that's so important now to see how France will do it. And Macron has started to do it. I think he's already far further in the good direction in a few months' time than his two predecessors in 10 years before him. Because in 10 years before came, and Sarkozy and Hollande were talking about it, but never did it. And he started now, even with some protests in the streets, but that's not so exceptional in France. That's the make part of life. So the opposite should be a miracle. So he is now already doing that, and that's the good example. And there are in other countries will certainly follow. The need for reform of the labor market is there because it's not normal that because of a lack of mobility, because of a lack of reform, you have nevertheless, again, I'm repeating myself, nearly 3 million of vacancies. Take, for example, a country like Greece, because what is the problem of a country like Greece? The problem of the country of Greece is not Greece itself. That you know, you're in the travel business. It's one of the best places, I should say, for your business. Secondly, it is certainly not also the figures financially. We are talking about a debt of Greece of 300 billion, historical debt of 300 billion, in a European Union that produce every year 15 trillion. If you give these figures to an economist in China or an economist in America, he says, what's your problem? No, the problem is a lack of reform there. the fact that the number of professions are still closed professions. And that in the beginning of the 21st century. That means professions where young people cannot enter. And then you have naturally a figure of unemployment at a certain moment nearly touching 50%.
I want you to stay there. I'm just going to come down here and just ask the audience. But just on that, the freedom of movement, if the UK...
Do a little bit freedom of movement.
Yeah, I'm doing a bit of free movement now. If the UK is adamant to no freedom of movement, will they still be able to negotiate for British passport holders to use the EU line, say, like Switzerland does?
I'm not starting now to negotiate with you.
I'm trying to get something out of you, aren't
This or that point. The point is, when it comes to the single market is for us the full freedom. And other issues, or the issues of the future relationship on visa, we will see in the next.
Okay. Any questions on the floor? Yes. Thank you.
Deirdre Wells, UK Inbound. Our members are very concerned about Brexit. 66% of our visitors come from the EU, and 20% of our employees are already going home, so very concerned indeed. I'm sure I'm not alone in the room in hoping against hope that common sense will prevail. But when you talk about a closer and more integrated European Union, I think the mood in this country has nowhere near shifted in that direction. And I feel, I suppose, even more pessimistic than I did before about the possibility that we may not leave, if that's the future that you see. Have you got any comments?
Well, my comment is that we're going to not now say, because of the Brexit, we're going to not reform the union. While the claim has always been this union is not fit for purpose. When I'm talking about the future of the European Union, I'm not talking about a bureaucratic superstate. I'm talking about a union that is based on the basic federal ideas of the founding fathers, in which every level is doing what is necessary. A number of things are done on the local level, a number of things are done on the regional level, a number of things are done on the national level, and only when you can create added value, you do it at a supranational level, on the European level. That's the idea. The idea is that only these things where you can create by international cooperation, added value needs to be done there. Take, for example, fight against terrorism. Terrorists don't know borders. It are our police services and our intelligence services who still know borders and who are not exchanging fast enough, broad enough, the necessary information because of these borders. So let's create there. You can have an added value of Europe. Let's interfere there.
Okay.
Or, for example, on another issue, for example, defense. The defense figures are very clear, but for example, where there is added value. The Europeans are spending more or less 40 to 45% of the American military expenditure. We have the second biggest budget, military budget, worldwide. The budget of Europe on military is 3 times bigger than the budget of the Russian Federation on military. But if you look then to what we are capable to do so, we can only do 10 to 50% of the operations of the American army. So I'm not a mathematician. I did only law studies, I know. Not university, many people maybe can think. Nevertheless, I was Minister of Budget, but I'm always saying, to be Minister of Budget, it's not necessary to know mathematics. The only thing what you need to know is the word no. All the rest is not, all the rest is not necessary. Well, but I know one thing, even with my law studies, that when you spend 40-45%, and you can only do 10 to 15%, 15 and 1/5 of their operations, you're at least 3 times less effective than them. And that's normal. We duplicate everything 28 times on everything. And we have an inflation of bilateral cooperation between countries. But that's not the way it works in the world of tomorrow. When you have 28 times strategic capacity and tactical capacity and medical services and so on and so on. So there is added value. That we have to do. What we have not to do together, and what we have done, I should say, far too much in the past, that is over-regulation of a market. But that is the consequence of how we built Europe. We have 30,000, more or less, civil servants in Brussels. We call them bureaucrats or Eurocrats. What they have to do? They have no budget. They have a budget of 1%. It's a joke, because 80% of this 1% are contributions of member states that are returning to these member states immediately. You could even skip it, should help save money, if we should do it. The real room of maneuver of the European Union is 0.20% of the European GDP. And then people are asking, you cannot solve the migration crisis. You have to do to establish a border and coast guard. You need to clean up the banks. I tell you, this is not possible. So the consequence of all this is that these 30,000 people, maybe there are more than them, I don't know the exact figure, are jumping on what? On regulation, regulation, regulation. So if I talk about the European Union, it's in many ways smaller than today. I don't need a European Commission of 28 where every country is represented, and if tomorrow Macedonia is entering or Montenegro is entering, we have a new commissioner, we don't not even know what portfolio to give him in the future.
Guy, can I just
sorry.
It's okay.
But I was so intrigued by the question. I found it a so fantastic question, so that
she got an answer, all right. We've got 5 minutes, and we've got 2 questions. I'm going to start. So, short, brief question, brief answer, please.
Okay.
Very quick.
In one.
Well, let's listen to the question.
Yeah, very quick, relevant to what you just said. So those 12, 15 strong people that will have to guide Europe and take decisions for Europe, how do you suggest they're going to be elected?
Yep. Answer me?
Oh, yeah, no, answer it, please. Yes, yeah.
Well, we are working for the moment, we are discussing, so I have to tell you what I do now when I'm returning to Brussels. My next meeting is about exactly the answer to that question. Normally, in 2019, if everything goes well, we're going to have for the first time transnational list. So, that means that you're going to have, not you are British, but those who are not British and European will have 2 ballots. 2 ballot papers. One to elect his representative of his country in the European Parliament, and the second with transnational candidates. So that's a list of 15, 20, 30 for every party list, and there you can elect these transnational candidates. And our idea is that automatically the head of this transnational list, who has the most votes, is then automatically elected to form this, what I call European government in the future.
Okay.
So that there is a direct involvement and decision by the citizens.
Brief one, please.
Last brief question.
Yeah, last thing. How it is possible that we do this transnational list is because of the 73 British MEPs that are disappearing, I want to tell you.
Okay.
Last brief question. Excellent speech, great politician, but I recently went through a divorce, and it was a civilised divorce because I managed to avoid the lawyers. In this case, the politicians are the lawyers. Tell me why you're not going to further your career by having a massive bust-up, lots of politics, winning all the big points, kicking the UK out, and furthering your career rather than the benefit of the people in the countries. That really worries me.
Because I think that the politician has not especially to look to his career. And I do politics from I was young. I did a few months lawyer, and for the rest I did only politics. So excuse me, my apologies. But a politician is something different. A good politician has to have a vision and defend it with passion. I have a vision of the future of Europe, and I like it that it would be created and realized with Britain on board and not without Britain, because I think that Europe is far stronger with Britain on board than without Britain. But if they have chosen to go out, then we have to respect their decision. But not to respect it in a way and say, yeah, and now the European Union doesn't count anymore. No, I have a vision. That is what I'm defending, I think, the interest of citizens. Not only of the Europeans, also the UK. I have proposed, and I hope we have now a positive reaction from Britain, to give even the possibility to every UK citizen who is in fact losing, sometimes against his will, his EU citizenship, to keep his EU citizenship. Why not? It's a proposal that we have done. So it's not, or for example, for the rights of the citizens, the EU citizens living in Britain and the UK citizens living on the continent, there is a whole discussion about it. I don't see the discussion. Let's simply continue these rights. Let's continue the rights of the EU citizens living here. Let's continue the rights for the UK citizens living in Britain. Point. No discussion about it. So that counts for me. What citizens, what the normal life is, and the activity in Europe concerns, and also in the UK. That is, in my opinion, what we have to defend as politicians.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please, a round of applause for Guy Verhofstadt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. Lunchtime, right? Yeah.